In Greek mythology, Achilles, also known by his ancient name Achilles, Achilles, stands as one of the greatest heroes of the Trojan War and is celebrated as the most formidable warrior among all the Greeks. He is the central figure of Homer's Iliad, where his unmatched skill in battle and deep, complex emotions shape much of the epic's drama. Achilles was born from an extraordinary union. His father, Peleus, was the mortal king of Phthia and a famed Argonaut, while his mother, Thetis, was a Nereid, a sea goddess known for her power and beauty. Because of this divine lineage, Achilles grew up surrounded by expectations of greatness. Raised in Phthia, he spent his childhood alongside his closest and most loyal companion, Patroclus, forming a bond that would profoundly influence both their lives. To prepare the young hero for the extraordinary destiny that awaited him, his parents entrusted his education to the wise centaur, Chiron. Under Chiron's guidance, Achilles learned the arts of healing, hunting, music, and warfare, shaping him into both a cultured young man and a fearsome warrior. As he matured, he eventually rose to command the legendary Myrmidons, a fierce and loyal tribe of warriors known for their discipline and might. During the Trojan War, Achilles performed many great feats, but his most renowned achievement was the slaying of Hector, the beloved prince of Troy. Their duel, fought just outside the walls of the besieged city, became one of the most iconic moments in ancient storytelling, symbolizing courage, vengeance, and the tragic cost of war. Although the Iliad ends before Achilles' death, many other ancient sources agree on how his life came to an end. Near the close of the Trojan War, Paris, guided by divine intervention, shot Achilles with an arrow. This was no ordinary wound, but a fatal blow to the only vulnerable part of his otherwise invincible body. Later legends, most famously recounted in Statius's Achilleid from the 1st century CE, explain this vulnerability. According to these myths, when Achilles was just an infant, his mother Thetis attempted to make him immortal by dipping him into the sacred river Styx. However, because she held him firmly by one heel, that small spot never touched the enchanted waters. It remained the single place where he could be harmed. From this story arises the modern expression, Achilles' heel, now used to describe a person's single point of weakness despite overall strength or excellence. Similarly, the Achilles tendon, located at the back of the ankle, is named in honor of the legendary warrior and his fateful vulnerability. The name Achilles appears very early in Greek history, long before Homer shaped the hero into the legendary figure known today. Linear B tablets, some of the oldest written records in the Greek world, preserve the name in the forms Achiriou and Achiriwi, the latter being the dative grammatical form of the former. These ancient records show that the name was already known in Mycenaean times, many centuries before the classical myths took shape. Over time, the name Achilles became increasingly widespread. It gained popularity after the 7th century BCE and eventually became common throughout the Greek-speaking world. The name even developed a female version, Achillea, Achillea. This feminine form appears in Attic inscriptions from the 4th century BCE and is also found in Halicarnassus on a funerary stele marking the grave of a female gladiator named Achillea, who fought an opponent described as an Amazon. The presence of this name in both mythic and historical contexts shows how deeply embedded the figure of Achilles had become in the cultural imagination. The meaning of Achilles' name has been the subject of extensive scholarly study. Many linguists interpret it as a combination of two ancient Greek words, akos, meaning distress, pain, sorrow, or grief, laos, laios, meaning people, soldiers, or nation. Put together, these elements form a Proto-Greek compound often reconstructed as Achillawos, which can be understood as he who brings distress to his people, or he whose people experience grief. This interpretation fits closely with themes in the Iliad. The poem repeatedly portrays Achilles as a source of grief, both to his enemies and, ironically, to his own people. His anger toward Agamemnon leads him to withdraw from battle, a decision that brings suffering and death to the Greek army. Later, his return to battle unleashes devastation upon the Trojans. Thus, Achilles becomes a hero whose presence can either shield or destroy, depending on the direction of his wrath. Some scholars, including Gregory Nagy, drawing on Leonard Palmer's earlier work, interpret Laos more specifically as a corps of soldiers or a mustered warband. Under this interpretation, Achilles' name carries a double meaning. When he leads well, his warriors bring grief to the enemy. When he leads poorly or is absent, his own men suffer the grief of war. This duality mirrors a major theme of the Iliad: the mismanagement of leadership and the destructive consequences of misdirected anger. Achilles was born from a remarkable union between Thetis, a Nereid and daughter of the ancient sea god, often called the Old Man of the Sea, and Peleus, the mortal king of the Myrmidons. Before Thetis married Peleus, two of the most powerful gods in Olympus, Zeus and Poseidon, had competed for her hand. Their pursuit ended only when Prometheus, the wise and far-seeing Titan, warned Zeus of a prophecy originally spoken by Themis, the goddess of divine law. The prophecy declared that Thetis would one day give birth to a son who would become greater than his father. Fearing the rise of a child who might surpass the gods themselves, Zeus and Poseidon abandoned their pursuit and arranged for Thetis to marry the mortal Peleus instead. A different ancient tale provides an alternative explanation for these events. In the Argonautica 4.760, Hera, Zeus's wife and sister, reminds Zeus how Thetis once resisted his advances with firm, unwavering loyalty. Because Thetis had been raised by Hera and respected her marriage bond, she calmly rejected Zeus, refusing to betray the goddess who had cared for her. Enraged by this refusal, Zeus declared that Thetis would never marry an immortal, ensuring that she would be given to a mortal husband. Both versions of the myth highlight the same outcome. Thetis was destined to wed Peleus, setting the stage for the birth of Achilles. When Achilles was born, several myths describe Thetis' attempts to make her son immortal. According to Statius's Achillid, and possibly earlier, now lost traditions, Thetis dipped the infant into the sacred waters of the river Styx. The enchanted river was believed to grant invulnerability to any mortal touched by it. However, because Thetis held Achilles by his left heel, that small part of his body remained untouched by the water and therefore mortal. This story eventually became the foundation of the famous legend of the Achilles heel, the single vulnerable spot that could lead to his death. Another ancient version presents a very different scene. In this account, Thetis tried to purge Achilles of his mortality by anointing him with ambrosia, the food of the gods, and then placing him upon a fire to burn away his mortal elements. Peleus discovered her in the act and, horrified, interrupted the ritual. Enraged at the interference, Thetis fled and abandoned both her husband and her infant son. It is important to note that none of the earliest sources, including Homer, mention Achilles being invulnerable or having a single weak point. In the Iliad, Achilles is clearly mortal. In Book 21, during a confrontation beside the river Scamander, the Paeonian warrior Asteropios, a skilled fighter who could cast a spear with either hand, struck Achilles and drew blood from his elbow. This demonstrates that early tradition depicted Achilles as vulnerable like any other hero. Furthermore, the fragmentary epics of the epic cycle, the Cypria, the Little Iliad, the Aethiopus, and the Ilio-Persis, make no mention of the Styx, the heel, or any special invulnerability. In many later vase paintings of Achilles' death, the fatal arrows often strike him in the torso, not the heel, reflecting this earlier understanding. After Thetis' departure, Peleus entrusted the boy to the wise Chiron, the most just and noble of the centaurs, who lived on Mount Pelion. Chiron became both teacher and guardian, raising Achilles in the arts of warfare, healing, music, hunting, and discipline. According to some traditions, Achilles was originally named Ligeron, and Chiron later bestowed upon him the name by which he became famous. Homer writes that Achilles grew up in Phthia, alongside his close companion Patroclus, forming one of the most important relationships of his life. The epic also notes that Achilles later passed down what Chiron had taught him, particularly medical knowledge, to Patroclus, who would eventually use these skills in the Trojan War. Thetis foresaw her son's fate and revealed to Achilles that he faced two possible destinies. He could enjoy a long, quiet life without glory, or he could seek everlasting fame through war, but die young. Driven by a desire for eternal renown, Achilles chose the second path and joined the Greek armies at Troy. A later and more unusual version of Achilles' early life is preserved by the Byzantine scholar Photius, who reports a strange account from the 6th book of Ptolemy Hephaestion's New History. In this tale, Thetis secretly burned each of her children by Peleus in an attempt to purify them. When she began to burn Achilles, Peleus discovered her and pulled the child from the flames, but not before his foot was scorched. He entrusted the injured child to Chiron, who later exhumed the corpse of Demesis, the fastest of all the giants, removed his ankle bone, and incorporated it into Achilles' burnt foot. This bizarre myth sought to explain Achilles' legendary speed through the grafting of a giant's divine bone. Across these many stories, some heroic, some mystical, some strange, Achilles emerges as a figure shaped by prophecy, divine heritage, supernatural attempts at immortality, and the complex choices that determined his fate as the greatest warrior of the Greek world. In Homer's Iliad, Achilles stands out not only for his unmatched skill in battle, but also for his commanding physical presence. Homer portrays him as exceptionally tall and striking, a warrior whose beauty and sheer strength surpassed that of all the other Greeks at Troy. His appearance reflects both his heroic stature and his semi-divine heritage. One of Achilles' most distinctive features in the epic is his long hair, often described like a flowing mane. Homer uses the Greek word haiti, shaite, to emphasize its length and the dramatic way it fell over his shoulders, suggesting wildness, vitality, and youthful power. His hair is also repeatedly described using the word xanthi, xanthi, a term that in ancient Greek referred to light-colored hair. This word did not strictly mean blonde, as in modern English. Instead, it could refer to a range of shades: pale blonde, light brown, golden, tawny, or even a warm auburn tone. This variation reflects the ancient Greek understanding of color, which was often broader and more symbolic than literal. Centuries later, long after Homer's time, a Latin text falsely attributed to Darius Phrygius offered a different, more detailed physical description of Achilles. Though written around the 5th century CE and not considered historically reliable, it helped shape later medieval and Renaissance views of the hero. This account describes Achilles as having a broad chest, a well-formed mouth, and limbs that were powerfully built, emphasizing his athletic strength and heroic proportions. His hair is described as long, wavy, and chestnut-colored, using the phrase capillo myrteo, a reference to the dark reddish-brown color of myrtle bark or myrrh. This later depiction adds a psychological dimension as well. Although Achilles appeared mild and noble in his everyday manner, he transformed completely in the heat of battle. On the battlefield, he became fierce, terrifying, and unstoppable, embodying the full intensity of heroic rage. The same account concludes by describing his face as carrying the joyful radiance of a man richly endowed, a poetic way of expressing the charisma, confidence, and larger-than-life presence that made Achilles unforgettable to all who encountered him in myth or storytelling. Thousands of years of artistic and literary tradition continue to draw from these portraits: Homer's majestic, youthful warrior with flowing light hair, and later traditions presenting him as a powerful, chestnut-haired hero, both capturing the timeless aura of Achilles, the greatest of the Greek champions. In later Greek traditions, stories that developed after Homer's Iliad, a fascinating episode emerges about Achilles' youth, often referred to as Achilles on Skyros. This tale attempts to explain how the young hero was kept away from the Trojan War before destiny ultimately drew him into it. According to these post-Homeric sources, Thetis, fearing the prophecy that her son would die young if he went to Troy, tried to hide him from the coming conflict. In some versions, Peleus, Achilles' father, played a part in the plan. Together or separately, they sent Achilles to the island of Skyros, where he was concealed in the court of King Lycomedes. There, the young warrior was disguised not merely as a noble visitor, but as a girl or princess, blending in among the king's daughters. Achilles is said to have lived under this disguise for some time, adopting a feminine name such as Pyrrha, meaning the red-haired girl, perhaps in reference to the warm hue of his hair. Other sources mention alternative names, Circicera or Aisa, the latter meaning swift, a fitting reference for someone destined to become the fastest and fiercest of heroes. Hidden among Lycomedes' daughters, Achilles passed as one of them, living quietly and out of sight as the Greek armies prepared for war. While on Skyros, Achilles formed a relationship with one of Lycomedes' daughters, Deidamia. Their union resulted in two sons, Neoptolemus, later also known as Pyrrhus, possibly inspired by Achilles' disguise name, and Oneros. This family connection would later play an important role in the aftermath of the Trojan War. However, fate refused to release its hold on Achilles. According to the story, the Greek seer Calchas revealed to the Achaeans that Troy could never be taken without Achilles. Hearing this, Odysseus set out to find him. Known for his cunning, Odysseus traveled to Skyros disguised as a peddler carrying an assortment of women's clothing, jewelry, and trinkets, items that would normally attract the attention of young noblewomen. But among these delicate goods, Odysseus placed a spear and shield, knowing that only a true warrior would be drawn to them. When Achilles, still in disguise, instinctively reached for the weapons, Odysseus immediately recognized him. With his identity exposed, Achilles was persuaded to abandon hiding and join the Greek forces, fulfilling the prophecy that linked his fate to the war. A different version of the tale offers another twist to Odysseus' strategy. In this telling, he ordered a trumpet blast to be sounded suddenly while he visited Lycomedes' daughters. The loud alarm startled the women, who ran away in fear, but Achilles reacted like a trained fighter, preparing to defend the palace. His instinctive readiness for battle revealed the truth more clearly than any disguise could. With his identity uncovered once again, he agreed to leave Skyros and embrace his destiny at Troy. These stories, depicted in ancient art, including a famous Roman mosaic showing Odysseus tricking Achilles, emphasize the hero's inescapable fate. No matter how cleverly he was hidden, Achilles' nature as a warrior could not be concealed, drawing him inevitably toward the war that would make him immortal in legend. In the Iliad, Achilles' arrival at Troy is described with an emphasis on both scale and organization, reflecting his status as one of the foremost Greek commanders. He did not come alone, nor did he lead a small band of warriors. Instead, Achilles sailed to the war with an impressive fleet of 50 ships, each vessel carrying 50 Myrmidon soldiers, elite warriors renowned for their loyalty, discipline, and ferocity in battle. This brought his total fighting force to 2,500 men, a formidable contingent even among the massive Greek host. To ensure strong leadership and effective command, Achilles divided his troops under 5 captains, each placed in charge of 500 Myrmidons. These leaders were chosen not only for their martial skill, but also for their loyalty and closeness to Achilles. Menestheus, respected for his noble birth and steady character. Eutorus, swift and valiant, second only to Achilles in agility and strength. Pisander, brave and reliable in the field of battle. Phoenix, Achilles' aging mentor and trusted advisor, honored with both authority and deep personal respect. Alcimedon, a capable warrior who ensured discipline and order among his men. This carefully structured command shows that while Achilles was the mightiest warrior in the Greek army, he was also a strategic leader who organized his forces with precision. The Myrmidons, under their appointed captains, would play a critical role throughout the Trojan War, most famously when they followed Patroclus into battle, sparking the chain of events that would ultimately draw Achilles back into the fighting. On their way to the Trojan War, the Greeks made an unplanned stop in the land of Mysia, a region ruled by King Telephus, the son of Heracles. Mistaking the Mysian coast for Troy, or perhaps simply driven by confusion and impatience, the Greek forces engaged in battle with the locals. During the fighting, Achilles struck Telephus with a devastating spear wound. The injury, however, was no ordinary one. It refused to heal, no matter what remedies were applied. Desperate for relief, Telephus sought guidance from an oracle. The oracle delivered a cryptic message: "He that wounded shall heal." Interpreting these words to mean that Achilles himself was the only one capable of curing him, Telephus made the journey to Argos, where the Greek leaders had assembled. There, he approached Achilles and pleaded for healing so that he could recover, and, in return, serve as guide for the Greek fleet on the difficult voyage to Troy, a destination the Greeks had already failed to reach once. Achilles ultimately healed him, fulfilling the prophecy and gaining a crucial ally who could show the vast Greek fleet the correct route to Troy. A different version of this tale appears in the fragments of a lost tragedy by Euripides, offering an alternate and more dramatic interpretation of the encounter. In this account, Telephus traveled to Aulis, the gathering place of the Greek army, but disguised himself as a beggar. With his wound still agonizing him, he humbled himself before Achilles and begged for healing. Achilles refused at first, insisting that he had no knowledge of medicine, a denial that highlights his youth and his limited perception of the skills he had learned from Chiron. Another variation presents the story with higher stakes. Telephus, still suffering, kidnapped the young princes, most notably Orestes, son of Agamemnon, and held him for ransom. The price he demanded was simple: Achilles must cure his wound. The Greeks were desperate to rescue Orestes and also eager to finally reach Troy, so they sought a solution. It was Odysseus, as usual, who unraveled the oracle's riddle. Since Achilles' spear had caused the wound, Odysseus reasoned that the spear itself must also contain the cure. Following his advice, the Greeks shaved or scraped small fragments from the tip of Achilles' spear and applied them to the wound. Miraculously, Telephus was healed. Having fulfilled the prophecy, whether by deliberate action or divine fate, Achilles gained both gratitude and guidance. Telephus, recovered from his incurable injury, became the Greeks' navigator, ensuring that the massive armada finally reached what would become the most famous battleground in ancient myth: the shores of Troy. According to the Cypria, the part of the ancient epic cycle that recounts the events leading up to Achilles' wrath in the Iliad, Achilles played a crucial role long before the famous quarrel with Agamemnon. When the Achaean army grew weary and began expressing a desire to abandon the expedition and return home, it was Achilles who prevented their retreat. Taking charge even as a young warrior, he rallied the Greeks and forced them to remain committed to the war. Following this, Achilles launched a series of raids along the Trojan coastline. Among his exploits were attacks on the herds of Aeneas, a Trojan prince and future founder of Rome in later tradition. He also sacked several nearby cities, including Pedasus and Lyrnessus. It was during the fall of Lyrnessus that the Greeks captured Briseis, the queen of the city, who would later become the central figure in Achilles' quarrel with Agamemnon. The Cypria also records Achilles' killing of Tennis, a son of Apollo, and his slaying of Troilus, a young Trojan prince, in the sanctuary of Apollo Thymbraeus. These early exploits established Achilles as a formidable and relentless warrior, even before the events narrated in the Iliad begin. It is important to clarify, however, that the famous love story between Troilus and Chryseis, or Chryside, found in Geoffrey Chaucer's Troilus and Chryside and William Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida, is entirely a medieval invention and does not originate in ancient Greek myth. In Dares, Phrygius's account of the destruction of Troy, the Latin prose narrative that shaped much of medieval Europe's understanding of Trojan legend, as well as in earlier Greek sources, Troilus is described as a young Trojan prince. He is usually said to be the youngest legitimate son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba, though some traditions claim that he was another son of Apollo, making him a semi-divine child. Despite his youth, Troilus is depicted as a capable warrior. Homer refers to him as a horse fighter or chariot fighter, highlighting his speed, skill, and courage in battle. Ancient prophecies linked Troilus' survival directly to the fate of Troy itself. If Troilus reached adulthood, the city would remain unconquerable. Because of this prophecy, the Greeks attempted to ambush and capture him. Yet according to one dark and disturbing tradition, the ambush took a tragic and sacrilegious turn. Achilles, overwhelmed not only by Troilus' beauty but also that of his sister Polyxena, developed a desire for the young prince. When Troilus resisted and refused Achilles' unwanted advances, the hero pursued him into the sanctuary of Apollo Thymbraeus. There, at the altar Omphalos of the god, Achilles decapitated Troilus, an act considered both brutal and impious. Other later versions softened the story slightly, though not its tragic nature. These accounts describe Troilus' death as accidental, occurring during an overly passionate or violent embrace between Achilles and the youth. In this telling, Achilles' own death later in the war is framed as divine retribution for this sacrilege against Apollo's sanctuary and against the young prince. Troilus became, in ancient literature, a powerful symbol of a beloved child struck down before his time, deeply mourned by his parents and by the city of Troy. The idea that Troy's fate was tied to Troilus' survival appears in several sources, including the First Vatican mythographer, who explicitly states that had Troilus lived to adulthood, Troy would have been invincible. However, this motif is far older and appears already in Plautus's Bacchides, showing that the theme of Troilus as a doomed and pivotal youth predates the medieval romantic versions that later transformed him into a tragic lover. Homer's Iliad remains the most celebrated account of Achilles' role in the Trojan War. At its heart lies one central idea: the wrath of Achilles, menis Achilleos, a fury so intense that it shapes the fate of armies and the course of the entire war. The poem opens with the famous lines, "Sing, goddess, of the rage of Peleus' son Achilles, the accursed rage that brought great suffering to the Achaeans." These opening words immediately establish that Achilles' anger, rather than the full span of the war itself, is the poem's true subject. Although the Trojan War lasted 10 years, Homer focuses on only a few crucial weeks near its end, during which Achilles withdraws from battle. The story begins with a conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon, commander of the Greek forces. Agamemnon had taken Chryseis, daughter of the priest Chryses, as a war prize. When her father begged for her return, Agamemnon refused, and Apollo punished the Greeks with a plague. The prophet Calchas, fearing Agamemnon's anger, would only reveal the truth if Achilles vowed to protect him, which Achilles did. Calchas then declared that Chryseis must be returned to her father. Humiliated, Agamemnon agreed, but demanded Briseis, Achilles' own captive and beloved companion, as compensation. Enraged by this public insult and by the loss of someone dear to him, Achilles withdrew from battle. At the urging of his mother Thetis, he refused to fight or lead his Myrmidons. Instead, still burning with anger, he prayed to Zeus to help the Trojans for a time, so that the Greeks would suffer and Agamemnon would realize the cost of dishonoring him. Zeus granted the request. The tide of war shifted immediately. Under Zeus's influence, the Trojans, led by their greatest warrior, Hector, drove the Greeks back toward their ships. As destruction loomed, the aged counselor Nestor urged Agamemnon to reconcile with Achilles. Agamemnon agreed and sent an embassy consisting of Odysseus, Ajax, and Phoenix. They offered gifts, honor, and the return of Briseis if Achilles would rejoin the fight. But Achilles refused them, insisting that no wealth or gifts could erase the insult he had suffered. He even urged the Greeks to sail home, declaring that he intended to do the same. Meanwhile, the Trojans continued their advance. They pushed the Greeks back to their ships and came close to burning the entire fleet. Facing catastrophe, Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, begged Achilles to let him lead the Myrmidons into battle, wearing Achilles' armor. Achilles agreed, but warned him not to pursue the Trojans all the way to the walls of Troy. Patroclus fought bravely, driving the Trojans from the ships, but he ignored Achilles' warning and pressed forward. He was finally struck down by Hector before he could launch an assault on Troy itself. When Antilochus, son of Nestor, brought the news of Patroclus' death, Achilles' grief was overwhelming. Heartbroken, he cried out in anguish until Thetis rose from the sea to comfort him. She then asked Hephaestus, the divine smith, to craft a new set of armor for her son, since Hector had taken the armor Patroclus wore. Hephaestus forged magnificent armor, including the famous Shield of Achilles, described in painstaking detail by Homer. Filled with rage and sorrow, Achilles finally returned to battle. His fury was so great that he slaughtered Trojans without mercy, always searching for Hector. At one point, Achilles' killing filled the river Scamander with so many bodies that the river god rose up in anger and tried to drown him. Only the intervention of Hera and Hephaestus saved Achilles from the raging god. Zeus himself took notice of Achilles' uncontrollable anger and sent the gods to restrain him. Without divine interference, Achilles' wrath threatened to overturn the very timetable of fate by destroying Troy prematurely. Eventually, Achilles cornered Hector. The Trojan hero ran, circling the walls of the city 3 times with Achilles in relentless pursuit. Finally, Athena, disguised as Hector's beloved brother Deiphobus, tricked Hector into turning and facing Achilles. Hector soon realized the deception, but it was too late to flee. Knowing the end had come, he charged Achilles with his sword, missed, and was mortally wounded. Accepting his death, Hector begged Achilles to return his body to his family. Achilles refused. Consumed by rage, he declared that the agonies Hector had caused him made mercy impossible. He killed Hector, tied the body by its heels to his chariot, and dragged it in the dust. That night, Patroclus appeared to Achilles in a dream, begging him to hold his funeral. Achilles organized elaborate funeral games in his honor. Homer adds cosmic symbolism to Achilles' rage. When he enters the duel with Hector, he is compared to Sirius, Orion's dog star, the brightest star in the sky and an omen of disaster. During Patroclus' cremation, Achilles is likened to Hesperus, the evening star, while the funeral pyre burns until Phosphorus, the morning star, has descended. In the final scenes of the Iliad, King Priam, guided by Hermes, Argifontes, secretly enters Achilles' tent and begs him to return Hector's body. Moved by the old king's grief and reminded of his own father, Achilles relents. He promises a truce lasting 9 days for Hector's funeral, with burial on the 10th day, echoing the tradition found in the story of Niobe. The poem ends with a solemn description of Hector's funeral. The fates of both Achilles and Troy lie beyond the poem's ending, still looming in the future. In later Greek literature, the story of Achilles continues far beyond the ending of Homer's Iliad. Works such as the Aethiopis, a lost epic composed around the 7th century BCE, and Post-Homerica, written by Quintus of Smyrna in the 4th century CE, pick up the narrative where Homer left off and describe the final tragic arc of Achilles' life. One of the major events in these works is the arrival of Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons and daughter of Ares. She comes to Troy seeking both glory and redemption, and King Priam hopes that her formidable strength might finally turn the tide against Achilles. After Achilles' emotionally charged truce with Priam at the end of the Iliad, the two warriors soon meet in battle. Penthesilea proves to be a fierce opponent, and Achilles, initially unsettled and taken aback by her appearance and skill, does not fight with his usual ruthless intensity. His hesitation nearly costs him his life. Only when he realizes that his distraction is endangering him does he regain focus and ultimately strike her down. But the victory brings him no joy. The moment Penthesilea dies, Achilles is seized by profound grief and admiration, a reaction that becomes one of the most striking emotional episodes in post-Homeric tradition. After the death of Patroclus, Achilles finds a new source of companionship in Antilochus, the son of the wise counselor Nestor. Achilles had always held Antilochus in deep affection, and Menelaus believed that, because of this bond, Antilochus was the only one capable of gently delivering the devastating news of Patroclus' death to Achilles. But tragedy strikes again. In the later epics, Memnon, the king of Ethiopia and son of the dawn goddess Eos, arrives to aid Troy. During battle, Memnon kills Antilochus, who sacrifices himself to protect his father Nestor. According to Philostratus' Imagines, Achilles mourns Antilochus bitterly on the battlefield, promising him both a heroic funeral and vengeance. Just as he did for Patroclus, Achilles returns to battle burning with grief and fury. He confronts Memnon, and after a mighty struggle, kills him. Memnon's divine mother Eos grieves so deeply that she refuses to let the sun rise. Only the intervention of Zeus, who persuades her to release the day, restores the world's balance. This mythic moment underscores the emotional echo between the two great cycles of vengeance. Achilles avenges Patroclus by killing Hector, and later avenges Antilochus by killing Memnon. Scholars have long noted that the story of Achilles and Memnon bears striking parallels to the Iliad's account of Patroclus and Hector. Many believe that the earlier tale of Antilochus' death influenced the way Homer structured the narrative of Patroclus's fall and Achilles' overwhelming reaction to it. The themes of friendship, grief, divine lineage, and vengeance appear in both traditions, suggesting that the older myths helped shape Homer's more polished epic design. The Aethiopis, which fully developed these episodes, has sadly been lost except for scattered fragments preserved by later authors. Yet its influence remains clear. It provided a continuation of Achilles' story, introducing new heroes, new tragedies, and new acts of vengeance, forming a crucial bridge between the close of the Iliad and the final chapters of the Trojan War. The relationship between Achilles and Patroclus has been one of the most discussed and debated subjects in both ancient and modern interpretations of Greek mythology. It has inspired countless readings, ranging from portrayals of deep companionship to interpretations of romantic or erotic love. In the Iliad, their connection is presented primarily as the ideal of an intense, loyal friendship. Achilles and Patroclus grow up together in Phthia, fight side by side, and share a bond of trust that shapes the emotional core of the epic. Homer emphasizes their closeness through scenes of tenderness, grief, and mutual devotion. But he does not explicitly state that they were lovers, nor does he describe any sexual relationship between them. Yet, in later centuries, many authors and thinkers explored their relationship through the lens of their own cultural frameworks. During the classical period in Athens, particularly in the 5th century BCE, their bond was often interpreted in terms of paiderosteia, a socially recognized relationship between an adult male, Erastes, the lover, and a younger male, Eromenos, the beloved. Because this practice was common and openly discussed in Athenian society, many Athenians naturally reinterpreted older myths through this cultural filter. In Plato's Symposium, for example, the characters in the dialogue assume that Achilles and Patroclus were lovers. The speaker Phaedrus argues that Achilles, being younger and more beautiful, must have been the beloved partner, while Patroclus was the older lover. This reflects Athenian societal norms rather than Homer's depiction. However, not all ancient writers agreed. In Xenophon's Symposium, Socrates insists that Achilles and Patroclus shared a deep, honorable, but entirely platonic bond, one rooted in loyalty, moral excellence, and mutual respect, rather than romantic love. Modern scholars offer further insight into why interpretations vary so widely. Historian Kenneth Dover argues that ancient Greek did not possess separate, precise terms to distinguish between heterosexual and homosexual identity. As a result, a man could desire women, admire handsome young men, or share affection with another male without these feelings defining a separate sexual orientation, as understood today. The Greeks did not divide relationships by modern categories. Instead, affection, beauty, admiration, and desire were discussed fluidly, without rigid labels. Because of this ambiguity, later generations, classical, medieval, Renaissance, and modern, have projected their own assumptions, values, and ideas about love onto the story of Achilles and Patroclus. Throughout history, many famous male pairs have been compared to them, often to imply a deep romantic or erotic bond, even when such an interpretation is not found in Homer's original text. Ultimately, the strength of their relationship lies in its emotional depth and openness to interpretation. Whether read as a powerful friendship, a symbolic partnership, or a romantic bond, Achilles and Patroclus occupy a central place in the literary and cultural imagination as one of the most profound relationships in ancient myth. The death of Achilles is one of the most intricate and varied episodes in Greek mythology. Even when focusing only on the oldest surviving sources, the tradition is far from uniform, offering several overlapping versions that reflect centuries of retelling and reinterpretation. In the earliest account, found in Book 22 of Homer's Iliad, Achilles' death is not narrated directly but foretold. With his final breath, the dying Hector prophesies that Achilles will one day be slain by Paris, aided by Apollo, at the Scaean gates of Troy. Later authors, such as Statius, add that the fatal blow came from an arrow to the heel, tying the prophecy to the famous later tradition of Achilles' vulnerable spot. In Book 23 of the Iliad, after the funeral of Patroclus, His spirit appears to Achilles as he drifts into sleep. This mournful apparition asks Achilles to ensure that their bones will rest together, placed side by side within the golden vase given to Achilles by his mother Thetis. This request deepens the emotional bond between the two companions and foreshadows Achilles' own imminent death. Ancient art preserves memories of the aftermath. In one famous scene painted on a black figure lekythos, Ajax carries the fallen body of Achilles from the battlefield, highlighting the hero's importance and the despair felt by the Greeks at his loss. The Odyssey also reflects on Achilles' death, though indirectly. In Book 11, Odysseus journeys to the underworld and meets the shade of Achilles. When Odysseus honors him as blessed in life, blessed in death, Achilles unexpectedly replies that he would rather be a lowly slave to a poor master than king over all the dead. This striking declaration shows that even the greatest of heroes found little comfort in the honors of the afterlife. Still, Achilles eagerly asks Odysseus about his son Neoptolemus, and Odysseus recounts the young warrior's exceptional achievements in the remainder of the war, bringing Achilles a measure of pride even in death. In Book 24 of the Odyssey, the ghost of Agamemnon provides further details about Achilles' funeral. He recounts that the cremated bones of Achilles and Patroclus were mingled together in the golden vase of Thetis, fulfilling Patroclus's request. The bones of Antilochus, who became Achilles' closest companion after Patroclus's death, were placed separately. Lavish funeral games followed, and a monumental tomb mound was raised on the shores of the Hellespont, visible to all sailors who would pass by for generations. Beyond Homer, later epics expanded the story. In the Aethiopis, Achilles is said to continue living after death on the island of Luke, located at the mouth of the Danube, a kind of heroic paradise where select warriors dwelled. Another widespread tradition claims that Achilles fell deeply in love with the Trojan princess Polyxena, one of King Priam's daughters. According to this version, Achilles sought peace and approached Priam to ask for Polyxena's hand in marriage. Priam, seeing the chance to end the war and gain the world's greatest warrior as an ally, agreed. Yet this fragile hope for peace was shattered. During the secret wedding arrangements, Paris, unwilling to lose Helen if Achilles married his sister, hid nearby and ambushed Achilles. Guided by Apollo, he shot a divine arrow that struck Achilles and killed him, often said to have hit his vulnerable heel. Another tradition preserved by Apollodorus adds a further twist. After his death, Achilles was united with Medea in the Elysian Fields, the paradise of heroes, suggesting that his story continued symbolically even beyond mortality. Across all these accounts, prophecy, battlefield tragedy, romantic betrayal, and hero cult mythology, the death of Achilles stands as one of the most heavily reimagined and complex episodes in Greek myth, marking the end of the greatest Greek warrior and foreshadowing the final collapse of Troy. After Achilles' death, his magnificent divine armor, forged by the god Hephaestus, became the center of a bitter and tragic dispute between two of the greatest surviving Greek heroes, Odysseus and Ajax the Great. Both believed themselves the most worthy successor to Achilles' unmatched legacy, and both claimed the right to possess the armor. To settle the matter, the Greek leaders arranged a contest. Each man stood before a gathering of Trojan prisoners who served as judges and delivered a speech proclaiming his bravery, achievements, and merit. Odysseus, known for his eloquence and cunning, presented a compelling argument, while Ajax, celebrated for his strength and steadfastness, spoke boldly of his heroic deeds. After hearing both sides, the Trojan captives declared that Odysseus deserved the armor. Their judgment enraged Ajax. Feeling humiliated and betrayed, he cursed Odysseus in fury. This outburst drew the wrath of Athena, who temporarily drove Ajax into a fit of madness. In his delusion, he slaughtered livestock, sheep, and cattle, believing them to be the Greek leaders who had wronged him. When Athena lifted the madness, and Ajax realized with horror that he had killed mere animals, not enemies, the shame overwhelmed him. Unable to endure the disgrace, Ajax took his own life. Despite winning the contest, Odysseus later chose to gift the divine armor to Neoptolemus, the young son of Achilles, honoring the rightful inheritance of the hero's lineage. Much later, in the underworld scene of Odyssey 11, Odysseus meets the shade of Ajax among the dead. Even in death, Ajax's anger remains unsoftened. He refuses to speak to Odysseus, turning away in enduring bitterness over the contest that contributed to his downfall. The armor they fought for was no ordinary military gear. It had been crafted by Hephaestus, the master smith of the gods, making it far stronger and more beautiful than anything a mortal artisan could produce. Thetis had commissioned the set for Achilles after his first suit of armor, worn by Patroclus when he entered battle, was seized by Hector following Patroclus's death. Among this divine equipment was the shield of Achilles, described in extraordinary detail in the Iliad as a masterpiece depicting the entire cosmos and the rhythms of mortal life. Another treasured weapon of Achilles was his legendary spear, the Pelian spear, a gift from the wise centaur Chiron, who had trained him in his youth. According to tradition, no mortal man except Achilles could wield it, a testament to both the hero's strength and the supernatural origins of the weapon. For centuries, a bronze-headed spear said to be Achilles' own was preserved in the Temple of Athena on the Acropolis of Phaselis in Lycia, a coastal city on the Pamphylian Gulf. When Alexander the Great visited Phaselis in 333 BCE, carrying a copy of the Iliad and modeling himself on Achilles, some believed he may have seen the relic. Although his court historians make no mention of it, the spear was still being shown in the time of Pausanias in the 2nd century CE, suggesting that the memory of Achilles' weapons endured for generations as sacred objects connected to Greece's greatest hero. Ancient Greek pottery often preserves stories that never appear in surviving written texts, and one such visual tradition concerns a quiet but striking moment shared between Achilles and Ajax. On numerous painted vases and amphorae, the two great heroes are shown seated together, intensely focused on a board game, likely Pedia, a strategic game similar to drafts or early chess. In these images, Achilles and Ajax lean toward the board with total concentration, calling out their moves while the world around them continues in chaos. The painters depict them as so absorbed in their game, so locked into their private contest of skill and wits, that neither hero notices the activity of battle taking place nearby. According to the visual tradition implied by these scenes, while the two were engrossed in their play, the Trojans launched an attack and advanced dangerously close to them. Achilles and Ajax, still unaware, sat focused on the game, leaving themselves vulnerable at a critical moment. It was only through the intervention of Athena that disaster was avoided. The goddess appears in several of these depictions, stepping between the heroes and the encroaching enemy. She raises her shield or extends her spear, protecting them just in time from the Trojan assault. This story does not appear in any surviving literary source, yet the consistency across numerous pottery paintings suggests that it was a well-known legend in visual storytelling. A moment highlighting both the humanity of the heroes and the protective watchfulness of Athena. It also reveals a charming contrast. Two of the greatest warriors in Greek myth, feared and revered on the battlefield, fully absorbed in a simple board game while danger silently approached. Across the ancient world, Achilles was not only remembered as a hero of the Trojan War, but also worshipped as a powerful figure whose presence extended far beyond myth. Archaeology, ancient geography, inscriptions, and literary references all reveal a vast and long-lasting hero cult, one that spanned from Greece to Asia Minor to the distant shores of the Black Sea. Throughout antiquity, the tomb of Achilles was believed to stand in the Troad, near Troy. This site was venerated not only by Greeks, especially the Thessalians, his own people, but also by foreign visitors, including Persian soldiers who honored him during their expeditions, Alexander the Great, who idolized Achilles, and the Roman Emperor Caracalla, who later imitated Alexander by holding funeral games at Achilles' tumulus. Achilles' cult was widespread. Shrines or sanctuaries dedicated to him existed in many regions. Astapelia, in the Sporades, Sparta, which maintained a sanctuary Ellis various Greek colonies in Magna Graecia, such as Tarentum, Locri, and Croton, his homeland of Thessaly. This extensive network of worship sites suggests that Achilles enjoyed near Pan-Hellenic veneration. One of the most vivid artistic testimonies to his cult appears on the Polyxena sarcophagus, circa 500 BCE. It depicts the sacrifice of Polyxena at the tumulus-shaped tomb of Achilles, an episode tied to post-Homeric tradition, underscoring that his grave itself was considered a sacred locus of ritual. Ancient writers confirm this. Strabo, 13.1.32, states that near Sigeon there stood not only a temple of Achilles, but also monuments to Patroclus and Antilochus. The local Eleans performed holy ceremonies for all of them, even for Ajax, though notably not for Heracles, whom they blamed for having ravaged their land. The greatest expansion of Achilles' cult occurred among the Greek settlers on the northern coast of the Black Sea. Excavations in the colonies of Olbia, Berezin Island, and the Tauric Chersonese have revealed early dedicatory inscriptions, graffiti and clay discs, dating as far back as the 6th century BCE. These inscriptions show that Achilles was worshipped in this region as a heroic protector, a cult that continued to flourish well into the 3rd century CE. In Olbia, Achilles was invoked under the title Pontarches, Lord of the Sea, or Lord of the Pontus Euxinus. He was venerated alongside major gods such as Apollo Prostates, Hermes Agoraios, and Poseidon, suggesting that Achilles held equal importance in civic and religious life. Ancient geography adds further evidence. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, mentions both a port of the Achae and an island of Achilles, famous for containing his tomb. He also refers to a long peninsula called Dromos Achilleos, the racecourse of Achilles, supposedly used by the hero either for exercise or for games he established. Though Pliny's measurements are not entirely accurate, scholars believe this racecourse corresponds to today's Tendra Spit near the northwestern Black Sea. Later geographers added more confusion. Pliny refers to the island as Achalia, Lus, and Macaron, Island of the Blessed, while Pomponius Mela places Achalia between the Borysthenes, Dnieper, and the Ister, Danube. Despite contradictory details, all descriptions point to the same place. Today's Snake Island, Ukrainian Zmyini, which ancient Greeks believed was Achilles' eternal home. Archaeology confirms this identification. In the 19th century, explorers found remains of a 30-meter square temple, likely dedicated to Achilles, although its remains were later destroyed during lighthouse construction. They also discovered inscriptions. A black glazed lekythos reading, "Glaucos, son of Poseidon, dedicated me to Achilles, Lord of Luke." A statue dedication from a citizen of Olbia honoring Achilles, Lord of Luke. An inscription affirming Olbia's long-term maintenance of the island's cult. These finds show that Lus was a major super-regional sanctuary for Achilles. Literary sources also speak of the mythical White Island. According to the lost epic Ethiopis, Thetis seized Achilles' body from the funeral pyre and transported him to Luke, where he lived on as an immortal hero. Pindar, 5th century BCE, references a bright island in the Black Sea, where Achilles dwelled after death, while in another poem he places Achilles on the Islands of the Blessed, alongside his father Peleus and Cadmus. The geography aligns with myth. The northern Black Sea was imagined as touching the stream Oceanus, the world-encircling river that bordered Elysium. Thus, the region naturally became linked to the afterlife dwelling of heroes. Further poetic testimony comes from Alcaeus, who speaks of Achilles, Lord of Scythia, reinforcing the idea that the hero ruled over the northern edge of the known world. This fits symbolically with his battle against Memnon, the Ethiopian prince from the far south, Achilles standing at the northern boundary, Memnon at the southern. The Periplus of the Euxine Sea, circa 130 CE, gives the most detailed description of Achilles' island sanctuary. It states, Thetis raised the island from the sea for Achilles. It held a temple with ancient statues and countless votive offerings. Seabirds washed and purified the temple every morning with their wings. Visitors sacrificed goats, made offerings, or sought permission through an oracle of Achilles if storms had forced them onto the island. If the oracle agreed, the sacrificial animal would stop running and allow itself to be caught. Many travelers claim to have seen Achilles in dreams or even in visions guiding their ships. Other sources, such as Dionysius Periegetes, describe the island as populated by white animals or white cliffs, emphasizing its supernatural brightness and purity. It was also considered a place of healing. According to Pausanias, the Delphic oracle once sent a wounded man to the island to be cured. Strabo adds that the cape of the racecourse of Achilles was sacred, even though treeless, and was still called Alsos, sacred grove. The name preserved its holiness despite its barren geography. Several Greek port cities were also named in Achilles' honor. Herodotus, Pliny, and Strabo mention an Achillean in the Troad, founded by settlers from Mytilene near the hero's supposed burial mound. Additional cities named for Achilles existed in Messenia and Laconia. Some modern theories, such as those of Nicolae den Sucianu, trace names like Aquileia or Chilia to Achilles, though such claims reflect modern speculation. Achilles' legacy shaped dynasties and rulers. The kings of Epirus claimed descent through Achilles' son Neoptolemus, allowing Alexander the Great, whose mother was an Epirot princess, to claim the hero as an ancestor. Alexander famously visited Achilles' tomb at Achilleon, paying homage to the warrior he sought to emulate. In 216 CE, the Roman Emperor Caracalla imitated this gesture, holding games around Achilles' tumulus during his march to Parthia.